You know how to hold it all together, but when it comes to your relationships, something's always missing. Welcome to Emotionally Wealthy, a podcast for high achievers who are ready to trade emotional disconnection for clarity, fulfillment, and relationships that are nourishing, not draining. I'm your host, Karen Conlon, licensed therapist, transformational coach, and your guide in turning insight into action. Are you ready for it? Let's do this. Welcome once again to the Emotionally Wealthy podcast. I'm Karen Conlon, and I say that this is a great episode because today's conversation is about reinvention post-divorce or post-breakup. If you've ever built your life around a role, a marriage, a belief system, or even a version of yourself that no longer fits, well, this episode is going to feel personal. Today, we are going to talk about how early messages about love and faith and worth quietly shape who you become. We are going to talk about what parts of yourself can go quiet inside a long marriage. We're also going to touch on faith, the intersection between faith and neuroscience, and how those things can work together to help you move from coping mechanisms to clarifying tools and strategies. My guest today is Melie Williams. Melie brings a beautifully layered perspective that bridges faith and neuroscience and her own lived experience with reinvention. So after a 14-year marriage that ended during COVID, she went on to rebuild not only her personal identity, but also her professional direction. She is the host of the Diamonds in Dumpster Fire podcast. She offers one-on-one coaching rooted in scripture and science. And in her coaching, Melie teaches resilience, not just through courses, but also through apps and emotional support rebuilding. So I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited to have you listen in. Melie, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so excited to be here today.
Melie, the minute that I met you, there was just something about your energy. There was just something about your honesty and your transparency that really attracted me like flies to honey. And I'm so glad that you're here today so that listeners can also get a little bit of what I got from when I met you. And I'd love to maybe start with you telling us a little bit about who you were before you became the woman that you are today. Let's start, if you will, with some of the early messages that you absorbed around love and faith and worthiness. What were some of those early messages that you would say shaped you and that later showed up in your relationships and in the decisions that you made around relationships?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family where, love was very much at the center. My parents met each other. They were, the just typical great story of high school sweethearts who are still together today. I mean, they have this great love story. And so I think, as a young person, seeing that and hearing that and knowing that it was this sort of magical storybook romance that unfolded for them and worked out. I had this idea that marriage was sort of this ultimate goal and the ultimate achievement that you could have. And it was like an inevitable thing that I was always seeking it. And I was always looking for oh, I'm going to meet the guy that I'm going to end up with because, I'm around the age and my mom met my dad. And that's great for those people where that works out. But when it doesn't, you find yourself kind of trying to fit yourself into situations and making them work. It's like, well, this puzzle piece doesn't fit, so I'm just going to stick it in here though and make sure it works because, yeah, as it turned out, no shade to my ex-husband, but I married the wrong person, in the end. So, yeah.
I'm so interested in hearing a little bit more about seeing your parents, right, as the sort of role model experience. I feel like that's one of the things that really impacts what we do or how we look for our partners. Anyone who's ever either worked with me or heard some of these themes being talked about on the podcast has heard me say, we marry our unfinished business. And so A lot of times it's for good reasons. A lot of times it's for reasons that are maybe not all that healthy, because sometimes we're just trying to kind of figure things out or reenact things so that we can kind of fix what we weren't able to fix when we were younger. When you look back, would you say that it created some blind spots as well? I'm curious about that, because I your story and what you're talking about, I think is super common. So I think it'll be really good for listeners to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had some blind spots for sure. I went into dating kind of with this mindset of like, I have to find my person now. Like, and this was like from when I was 12 to when I was 16. I got married at 26. And
Mm-hmm.
I was constantly kind of like looking for, I knew like the way my parents, they met when they were teenagers at a party or like a band thing or, and so I would go to these things and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to replay this story. I wasn't probably like thinking it at that time, but looking back now, I can say, okay, I was trying to create the same story for myself. And even, looking at when I was dating my now ex husband, we found major incompatibilities. I mean, we were not
Mm-hmm.
aligned faith wise. We were not aligned in lifestyle choices. We were not aligned in like where we saw our futures going. And yet we had spent so much time together that I was like, okay, I'm 26. Like, I got to make this work. And there's enough good here that we can make it work. And we did make it work for 14 years, right? So it wasn't like it was a disaster. But yeah, looking back, like if I had been where I'm at now, where I can see, okay, I'm recreating patterns. I'm doing these things because I'm trying to tell a specific story with my life, not necessarily the one that's meant for me to tell. I would have chosen differently.
Yeah. Did you feel, Melly, that you got a chance to create your own identity that was apart from his at any time before your marriage? Like what were those parts of you that were just you, that if you hadn't been in that relationship so early on, that was you then, and it's still you now? Because I feel like sometimes we lose, especially when we start relationships so young, we lose that, or we don't get to develop it. So I'd love to know if, when you compare it, do you find that you have those parts of you that still are there and they're still purely, genuinely Melly?
Well, and I will say this, there are parts of me that were who I was when I met my ex. They were before, and then I kind of diminished them. And it was when I started kind of coming back to who I was. I was on this journey of like, figuring out what I wanted and who I was. And it was during that time. And none of that led to me wanting to leave my marriage. I actually, not that it matters, but my ex is the one that made that decision. I actually didn't want out of my marriage. But a lot of that decision he made because he didn't like me kind of going back. He said I was changing and becoming somebody that he didn't know. And that's not true. It was who he had met all along. For example, just silly things, some of them. Like I was really into the performing arts. When he met me, one of the first experiences he had of me, we had met at a party and then he came to hear me sing at a club in LA. So it was no surprise that I love doing things like this, but then it became kind of a problem. Like if I wanted to pursue something of that nature and, if I wanted to drive up to LA for an audition for something, it was like, why are you going to do that? Why are you focused on that? But yeah, those things, it's important to be true to yourself because I don't remember who said it, but it's like if you put yourself in a box for somebody else and you allow them to kind of shape who you are, eventually you're going to make a jailbreak. And that's when they're going to be like, what happened here?
Sounds to me like you always were who you were, and then nothing in that aspect changed, except that maybe on some level there was an expectation on the other person's end that maybe you would lose interest, or maybe this was just a phase. When you went into marriage, you mentioned a few minutes ago that there were parts of you that then started to kind of quiet down a bit. What happened? What were some of those things that you started to find about yourself? Because 14 years is a long time. And so what were some of the things that you found that you felt like either happened purposefully? Maybe there were things that you started to purposely say, okay, well, if I want this to work, I'm going to need to shut this down, or maybe put that on pause, versus the things that when you look back now, that happened very quietly without you even noticing. Were there things that happened both on purpose and also kind of invisibly without you even realizing that you were sort of changing or quieting yourself down?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say within my marriage, there were a lot of areas where I quieted myself down just to be who he kind of wanted me to be. I was, there were a lot of things that were my identity in that marriage that just literally poof went away the minute that those papers were served to me because, I was a military spouse. And so a lot of my identity was wrapped up in this, like, I'm a military spouse, keeping everything set at home for him. And I loved doing that. And so I'm not like saying that that wasn't who I would have been,
Yeah,
but that
yeah.
became so much of who I was that like I kind of lost sight of the other things. So for example, I had a job, and it was, I enjoyed my job for about like, I was at one company for about 8 years that was very flexible and allowed for me to be able to, drive him to the airport when he needed to go on a trip or drop everything and go to the base when he was coming home. And so I did not go out for promotions for things that would have required me to be, more present at work. And, the people I worked with were great. They knew like, hey, this is what she wants. And it was because I did love my life. But because of that, after the marriage ended, I hadn't really built the kind of network that I, maybe would have, even like the performing stuff, which has always just been fun for me. I've, just done it here and there, but I probably would have done a lot more of it if I had allowed myself to just be who I was. And when I started to do that and I started to kind of shift a little bit more towards that, it was like, what are you doing? I literally had quieted those parts of me for so long. And it was just like, you can't do that forever. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
That brings me to the thought around the conversations that people have or don't have about expectations, right? With marriage. Like I've worked with couples, sometimes in a couple, and sometimes I'm working with one person that is part of a couple. And one of the things that has always surprised me is the lack of conversation actually that's had about expectations. There's a lot of conversation that happens around, oh, our hopes and our dreams and how many kids we want to have and what neighborhood we want to live in, like things like that, very sort of logistical and practical things, and finances sometimes, not all the times. But it's interesting to see over the years just how much of the breakdown ends up happening or coming back to the expectations that were never discussed. Like there's this expectation that, oh, well, right? So I don't want to presume obviously that was the case for you, but based on what you're saying, it sounds like there were expectations that maybe your ex had about what marriage looks like, or maybe the roles that we're supposed to play. Did you know what his expectations were? Did he know what yours were? Or was that something that kind of came up kind of organically as the little rifts or the little conflicts would come up?
Yeah, it was definitely more organic. I mean, we had, I think before we got married, the church we got married at had like 2 sessions of premarital counseling. It was like a group class, and they never talked really about any of this stuff. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like a big surprise, I think, for both of us. We got married right before he was leaving on a deployment. And it was like, it's either now or, we don't know when he'll be home. And it was just like this whole thing. We just kind of jumped into it. And, um, we did not have those conversations. And when things would come up, because there were issues that did come up where we were like, really, neither of us right or wrong, but very much like not in alignment. That should have been like a pause, hold on, let's discuss this. Instead, we're like, love will conquer all. We'll just forget that ever happened,
Yeah.
and just move past it. So, and that's, I think when you're young and you're excited and you're in love, it's like very easy to just put those things aside. Now, when I am not currently dating, but when I have dated, I have like really like said, okay, let's talk about this. Like to the point that people are like, yikes, we're on a first date.
Right. Yeah. We will definitely be touching on dating in a little bit because
Okay.
this is, 100% one of the things that people not just struggle with, but also that we want to talk about to like let people know. I've been through a divorce also, and we definitely want to let people know that there is a life post divorce for sure. More than life, there's thriving that is absolutely possible. But I'm also still kind of staying within the vein of where you were, did you feel, Melie, that you were needing to fulfill some kind of identity? Because marriage sometimes does become an identity. Knowing what I know about you, I see you as a very authentic person and someone who's like very genuine. But I also know that sometimes to make a marriage work, you sometimes lose parts of yourself, or you like numb down parts of yourself. Did you have that type of experience where you were kind of feeling like, I'm needing to fill this role? In order to do that, I'm going to have to quiet down this part of me.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that, sometimes it's easier to just be like,
Hmm.
all right, I'll be the one to go with the flow here because the other person may never do that. So,
Yeah.
there were a
Yeah.
lot of times where, yeah, I would just kind of be like, okay, there were times where I would have liked to have done one thing, he would like to do the other. And so I think in a lot of ways, yeah, there were times where that would happen. And then I will say during my marriage, because of like conflicts that would constantly come up, and because frankly, we were not a good match in a lot of ways, there were a lot of conflicts. And my way of dealing with that, I didn't know it at the time, but I learned actually as I was going through my divorce, there's like fight, flight, freeze,
Yes.
and then fawn. And I didn't
Yeah.
know about fawn. No one really talks about that until you like,
Yeah.
hear a therapist tell you about it. So that would be like, I'd be like, okay, let's just make this work, to the point where I literally had, when we would get into an argument, and it could be just a small argument, I would start like shivering and like my teeth would be chattering. And he would be like, what is wrong with you? What? It's not even cold in here. What's wrong? And I'm like, I had no idea why. But because I
Yeah.
was I was trying to overly like, what can I do? And it wasn't working, that my body just kind of, started shutting down on me in a way. And I was having that just completely dysregulated. Even today, 5 years post divorce, I haven't experienced anything to that level, but it's very easy for me to get dysregulated because I'll start to go to that, like, okay, what can I do to fix this? Even like, when we do talk about dating, that'll be one that comes up because, yeah, I became this person that was like, what can I do? How can I just calm things down? How can I, should I make him a cup of coffee? Should I just be quiet? Should I go shut the door and just, be not visible right now? And so, you do that enough and yeah, your body actually starts, it's like, what's that book? The Body Keeps the Score.
Right. Hmm. Yeah.
It definitely does.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought up our fight flight response, because fawning, you're right, that is one of the ones that rarely gets mentioned. And fawning is, for those of you who are listening who have not heard the term, is that the response that your body has to stress, to the stress of the environment, where there's a shutdown. And you're not fighting, you're not fleeing, you're just kind of laying down, right? Your body is trying to react in a way that's going to be as neutral as possible. You're literally just like breaking down. Like, imagine yourself just kind of lying down and playing dead, and that sounds very exaggerated, but it's kind of what happens to your nervous system.
Yeah.
Would you say that that was always you, or was that something that kind of happened throughout the marriage in your attempts to not have conflict?
You know, it probably was there well before that. I mean, I could tell stories of like boyfriends where that happened, before. It really became exaggerated, I think, in my marriage. And I think a lot of it too was because, so about 2.5 years ago, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD. It was good to have that and understand what was going on. But it was also, I ended up looking backwards, probably more than I should have, and thinking, oh, I could have fixed things if I'd only known, because a lot of his frustrations with me came down to things, not, I'm not making excuses for myself, but there were things that, like, had I known how to
Yeah.
regulate properly with ADHD, had I known how, and if he maybe had understood certain things, like there would be times where we would get an Amazon package, I'd bring it in the house, I'd open it up, and whatever was in there was, I would just get completely sidetracked and I'd leave the box. And that was like I mean, we had such fights over a box being left in the walkway. Had I been able to make notes for myself and be like, don't forget to do this, things like that, I think it would have helped But yeah, I mean, I've always, who I was in my marriage, I think there were certain things that were definitely diminished a little bit, but I was still who I was. And then there were other things like, the fawn response, for example, that really got heightened,
Hmm.
but were definitely always part of who I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so the neurodivergence does play such a big role in the way that we function in relationships, in the way that we regulate ourselves. I also got diagnosed with ADD like later in life, just like maybe 3 years ago. And oh my gosh, it explained so many things. Like what you just said about the box, I could have said that verbatim. So out of sight, out of mind type of things,
Mhm.
and I know that everyone has different experiences, but there are some things that in a relationship, when you have a partner who has ADHD or is on some kind of spectrum of neurodivergence, there are absolutely behaviors that are difficult to explain. And it does take either patience or curiosity from your partner to understand or to ask like, hey, what's going on, and not take it personally, because when you are dealing with a neurodivergent brain, there's a struggle. I don't know if this is your experience. I'm curious to know. I know that I've oftentimes felt a lot of shame and guilt for like, why can't I remember to do this? Or why do I need 55 post-it notes in different colors
Yeah.
to like remember to do things? And so, and time blindness and rejection sensitivity, which it sounds like you were having some of that. And not knowing that this is part of it. It's not always just the way that we were raised. There's some things also that just come about with the way that our brains work.
Yeah, definitely. And there were times where I totally would beat myself up for it. I would be like, oh, like I forgot another box in the walkway. Like how did I even do that? And I'm like, like I would literally like tell myself as I was opening, okay, I'm gonna but say like it was, something I had to go put away, and then I'm excited about it. And like how it's hard when you're, you know, focus in and you lock in on something. If it was something related to a craft, I would just get like tunnel vision on that and like forget it. So, yeah, I it's interesting though, like to look at it now and just to know like if, and it's a huge if, I ever ended up trying to be in relationship with someone else again, like this would be an area I would bring it up obviously early and discuss it. And I was talking to somebody one time on the apps and we had gone out a couple of times and I brought it up just because I just thought, to be really open and transparent about who I am. And he was like, "Oh, that's nice. You give yourself a built-in excuse." And I'm like, "Nope, not him."
Okay, bye bye.
He-
There's 5 red flags right there.
yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I think about what you just said, that person said to you, of course, 5,000 red flags came up for me. But what I'm also hearing is, boy, this is you on your best behavior.
Yeah, I know, right?
I mean, wow, if this is you on your best behavior and trying to impress me, saying that to me, right? And I think it's really important for people who are out there dating to kind of hear stuff like this, because a lot of times when we're in that mode of like, oh, we want to find someone nice to date and a good partner potentially for a future, we tend to overlook little comments and little things like that. And those are not little comments. It's what's that old saying? When people show you who they are, believe them.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that was that guy showing you who he is, right?
Exactly.
Super early on.
Yeah, super early. And luckily, I was at a place where I was like, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. And now I can move on. I had one guy that I was talking to, and like, we were never actually dating, but we were talking like all the time and talking about futures and everything for 2 years. Okay, 2 years it went on. We hung out a couple of times, but he literally told me in the beginning, I'm kind of a jerk to women I date. And
Okay.
I thought he was kind of joking, so I was like, "Oh, yeah, right, you're so great, like, you'd never be" he was the biggest jerk, and, like, he told me, like, week 1. Why didn't I listen?
I mean, you kind of got to respect that, like he's just letting you know. I'm
Yeah,
just letting you know what you're getting into.
yeah.
No, so I love to hear these kind of truth bombs and also how you're receiving them. And I want to get into that more. I want to ask you one more question about the divorce. Your divorce happened during COVID. And I'd love to know if you would share what it felt like for you in terms of what was ending and what was being revealed to you.
So yeah, it was that time was so weird for me. So March of 2020, right as like the lockdowns were happening, my ex was on a work trip and he told me that he was coming home and he said, I think I may have caught whatever this thing is. I don't even know if at the time they had named it COVID
Yeah.
yet, but
Yeah.
he was saying I'm sick and I don't think you should be at the house when I get home. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't want to leave. Like, there's all this stuff going on. And he was, at the time I was actually visiting family and he's like, just stay there for a few days till, because what if this is really bad? What if it's something that could, really hurt you or whatever? And he convinced me to stay at, I was at my parents' house. So I stayed there. And then when he got home, he told me he was not sick, actually, and he didn't have anything. He just didn't want me to be there when he told me that
Oh,
he was filing for divorce. I never saw him again. We had one like 5-minute FaceTime call where I tried to like gather information and whatnot. It did not go well and he wanted off really quickly. And so
yeah.
I was already like really unsure of like, what is life going to even do? Is there life after COVID? I mean, we were all like, inside I was scared of that. I didn't know like what to do. I became very fearful of like everything, on the outside world. I think a lot of us did. I had to really force myself to like go to a grocery store again, like get out in the world again. But also, I was dealing with this like, am I going to be alone for the rest of my life? Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to, at the time, I had a business that I was running, but it wasn't like, he was the main breadwinner in the family. And that was just kind of how it was. So I had to figure out how to like, fully support myself in the midst of COVID. And so I had a choice. And I remember like sitting on the floor and I had just been like bawling my head off. And I was like, I have this choice. Like I can allow this to like completely destroy the rest of my life, where I can like hustle and get up and do what I need to do. And that's what I chose to do. But it is a choice that we have to make, and it's a hard one. So for anybody who's going through a divorce and it's maybe circumstances are not what you want, I'm not like saying, oh, I just made the decision and yay, everything worked out. I mean, there was a lot of hard work, a lot of tears in there. And even now, it's 5 years post divorce, and I definitely have scars from the way that things were handled. But I am, as you mentioned, I study resilience, I teach resilience, and a lot of that comes from just good old life experience at this point.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty traumatic ending where you aren't given the space or even, I don't know, basic respect to just have a face to face and have the discussion. How did you how did you do that? Because I know that there must have been some grief that you're dealing with, not just for the marriage and, the relationship and all these things that we grieve when there's a separation, but then there's also grief about your own identity and who you were and what you wanted and were hoping for. So how did you manage these two things, like sort of reinventing yourself and reconstructing that identity in real time while you were also grieving? Did you count on family support? Did you go to therapy? How did you do these things?
Yeah, it was a lot of trial and error, and then yeah, I did have really close family that was a big support to me, so that was huge. And then also, I'm a person of faith, and so my faith in God definitely carried me through. I remember a lot of times, like I grew up being, in the Christian faith, and my family's always kind of, we've gone to church, and it was always part of my life. Even in, my marriage, we would go, and it was just
Hmm.
sort of like this thing. And it wasn't until I went through this though that I really truly started to like wrestle with issues with God in a way that I know like some people of faith might be uncomfortable with, but like I was super honest with God and I would tell him like I'm angry about this. And when my prayers were like not just like, oh, please make everything great. It was like, why would you do this to me?
Yeah.
And I just could get really real about it. And that helped me, I think, in a lot of ways to just kind of, there were things that opened up in my life that like I had prayed about, like if, I needed a job, like I couldn't run my business anymore to the level of like where I could support myself. And I just thought, you know what, I need a job. This is what I need to make. And I'm just going to hustle and do this. But God, I am going to need some help because I have not made this kind of money before, but this is in order to stay around family. Like, this is what I need. And sure enough, like I ended up interviewing and getting an offer literally exactly like what I needed. And so that was just like confirmation to me that like God's like, I hear you. You got handed, kind of some crazy circumstances, but we're going to work it out together. So definitely my faith. And then I really dove in on studying resilience. So like when I was married, because I was a military spouse, and they would offer these programs sometimes for military spouses. It's when you're a
Hmm.
military family, you need resilience to get through when somebody's away for months at a time, and it's just there's a lot of stuff that's really taxing on the family
Yeah.
in those circumstances. So they provided us with some resilience training. And I remember it hit me one day. I was like, wait a minute, this is like in different circumstances, but this is like that stuff they taught us in those classes. And so I signed up for a class online and started really studying it. And then that led to me like wanting to learn about the neuroscience behind it and why do our brains. I remember I watched this like free video on like why we do the things we do based on brain science. And I was just like, whoa, like it's all coming together, And then I had originally, I was going to do a master's program in applied neuroscience. I'm doing a certificate program now because honestly, ADHD, I can't like focus enough for that.
Oh, I hear
But
you.
yeah, for me, like learning and doing and just keeping on like going. I got the job, ended up getting a different job at one point, and then I got laid off. And that was the first time I had gone through that. So now I'm like, I have my own, like, I'm fully responsible for myself. I've got, got to make X number of dollars, and I have no job. And it was crazy. And that, again, God provided. Literally, I was 2 weeks away from being completely out of money. And I ended
Wow.
up getting an offer, and they were like, hey, can you start? It was going to start like in a month. And they were like, can you actually start in 2 weeks? Like right when I'm like, absolutely, I can.
That's it's pretty amazing, right? Because when I think about faith, I think faith can be a comfort or it can also be a compass. And first of all, I really appreciate that you allowed yourself to be angry and to be upset and to question and then also continue to lean on it, right? Lean on your faith and do the things that also brought you comfort. And then I think it's so fascinating that you started to study resilience. If you were to say the biggest things that I'm walking away with when I think about resilience, and I know it's a loaded question because there's so many things, but if you were to say, look, these are my top two, top three, or top one that I've learned about resilience and our brains, what would you say that is?
Let's see. I mean, number one is just the ability, I think, to be able to bend with circumstances. There's, along with resilience, I learned in my program actually recently this tool in psychology. I guess I think it comes from DBT, but it's the radical acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I love how that really plays into resilience because it's like, it doesn't mean that, like, okay, let's go to the layoff, for example. Like, I've been laid off. Oh, yay, I'm happy. That's toxic positivity. And that
Yeah.
has like no place anywhere. It's like, okay, this is happening. It's like, okay, I can't change it. I can't wish it away. So I'm going to radically accept it. This is my circumstance. This is where I'm at. Doesn't mean I want to stay here. But now that I've accepted it, then you give yourself back that brain power to be like, okay, now what can I do to move a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So that was one. And then also, I think just learning, the way that our bodies are so interconnected, our nervous system, like, because a lot of times, people want to do mindset work and they're like, I want to rewire my brain. I
Yes.
want to rewire my mind. And it's like, yes, do it, but you can't do that if your body's in dysregulation. And it took me forever. I would take these mindset courses, even like when I was married and like, mindset, and I'm like, it doesn't work for me. Like, these must be like for other people. But it's like, if you're living in a state of that constant, state of just, you're dysregulated, you can't think straight, of course you're not going to be able to utilize your prefrontal cortex. You are in survival mode. So I
Hmm.
would say, yeah.
Yeah. And to your point, we all look for quick fixes. I mean, nobody wants to stay feeling bad or anxious or sad for longer than they need to. And so I think it's pretty normal for people to kind of want to go the strategies and tools and what can I do now to make me feel better right away. Um, I think what you're talking about is the harder but most essential piece of self regulation or emotional regulation, which is how is my body reacting to what's going on? Because if you don't deal with that, it's going to be very difficult to get that part of your brain that can rationalize and make reasonable decisions. And decisions, when I say reasonable, I'm talking about the types of decisions that allow for both emotion and rationale to work together, right? Like you're not denying your emotions and you're not fully just going all cognitive and intellectual. Like you're really being able to meld these two worlds together. And so, so often we're looking for the very sort of quick fixes. And honestly, though, when I look at it from a psychological standpoint, what I am seeing there is also kind of a fight or flight response. If I think about it to a certain
Hmm.
degree, right? You are kind of in survival mode.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, based on your experience, right, and so many people's experience, we know that both grief and growth can coexist. And it feels to me like that's what was happening for you, where you were going through periods of grieving and at the same time growing. And so you start dating. You had a couple of experiences. Dating after divorce sometimes offers us a mirror. After you started to do the work on yourself and doing the self reflections and really starting to understand some of the things that you lost about yourself in the marriage and now what you're looking for and wanting. If you look at dating as a mirror, what kind of things did you see in yourself as you look at that mirror that was dating?
Hot mess.
I love
So, I mean, I was
it. Can I
any
say
guy that
something here? Like, I have
yeah.
this question. It's all like super reflective and super, and you're like, hot mess. Love it. Yeah.
I mean, that's just like in the beginning, that's where I mean, I got on the apps. I think, like, honestly, and this is, I'm not an expert on dating in any, only my own experience, but I will just speak to my experience. I think a lot of people do what I did and they get on the apps when they have no business being on there. And those are the people that you find. Like, I'm in
Yeah.
a place where if I did meet somebody, I think I'm in a good spot. I don't need that in my life, though. I'm perfectly fine without it, but you couldn't pay me to get back on those dating apps. I would never go through that again. So, I think, you get a lot of people on there, and there are probably people in there. I'm sure someone will be like, "How dare you? I met my husband on there." I know it happens, right? But especially now, I think as like, as a society, like with AI and social media, I know someone, who told me their entire profile was AI photos. And I'm like, why would you do that? Right. So it's
My.
like, I just don't understand. Like, so there's a lot of just weird stuff going on. And I had a really, I don't want to say bad experience, but I didn't get the outcomes I was looking for. That's for sure. I never met one person in my time on those apps who actually was interested in pursuing something meaningful. Even I dated somebody for 2 to 3 months, I guess, technically exclusive, but he didn't want to put a label on it. And it was just like, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, a lot of games, a lot of lies. Unfortunately, people lie about their age, people lie about their marital status. You find out,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're actually just married and figuring out whether they want to jump ship, seeing who's out there first, which is not cool. So yeah, definitely, like, when I was going out on those initial like first dates and stuff, and I definitely I got way too attached to people that had I looked at from like a reasonable sort of like, is this person a potential partner for me? It would have been like, no, we have all these differences and everything. But it was like, I would glom onto like the weirdest things. Like one guy, the one that I talked to for like 2 years. I mean, we have like almost nothing in common,
Yeah.
but he liked the same video game my ex-husband and I used to play. And I
Right.
was like, oh, I could do that again. Oh, because we still like, I'm not a gamer by any standard, but I love Zelda, that whole
Yeah.
franchise. And so we would do that for fun. My ex and I would play that game. And I mentioned that game at one point, and this guy was like, "Oh, I love it, and I play that game." And I was like, "Okay, we're gonna make this work." Like silly stuff
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like
It's
so.
familiarity, right? Like that's
Yeah,
what I'm hearing. There's familiarity, and it takes some of the awkwardness out of it. If you can find this little thing that you both can kind of quote unquote bond with
hmm
easily, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So you're noticing these patterns
hmm
and you start becoming self-aware. Were you able at some point to take what you're learning, right? Were you able at some point to make dating a tool for awareness rather than a repetition of these patterns that you started to notice?
yeah. I would say so. I mean, like in the last final, I guess, months of when I was on the apps, like I met a couple of people that are nice people. Some I'm actually still friends with, and we just realized like this isn't a compatible partnership. But there's like one of them in particular is a good friend. We get together sometimes, and it's like I wouldn't have been able to do that and
Right.
recognize like there's some great things that can come out of just having a friend. It doesn't have to be this romantic partnership, but because in the past, I was so set on finding my person, I probably would have missed out on a great friendship
Yeah.
or tried to make that great friendship work romantically when there's some, just choices, just things that like we both want in life that aren't
Yes.
compatible, not right or wrong, either one. But it's like that would have been me trying to like mold myself into what is he looking for and how can I be more of that instead of like, okay, I'm not what he's looking for, but we get along great. We have fun. Like it's nice to have a friend to go out and hang out with and do stuff with. And so now seeing it as like, it's not this like be all end all. Like, I would go out on a first date and I would honestly, it's like all the dating coaches probably like, oh my gosh, no wonder she didn't meet anybody. I would be like, okay, this might be it. This might be when I meet my husband. Now, part of that,
I don't think you're alone in that. I don't
no,
think you're
and
alone in
I
that.
do narrate as a side gig, I narrate audiobooks, mostly romances. So I always tell people, I'm like, it's not my fault. I am high on Hallmark. Okay. Like half the time I'm like sitting here in this booth. This my back here is the mic I use for audiobooks. I'm in here telling the most beautiful, just perfect love stories. And I'm like, I'm going to have that. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
make this happen. Even, I was telling someone this story the other day, but a lot of times, like, I would find ways to like match up what I was experiencing, like in the
Yeah.
audiobook to like real life. And there was this guy I'd met, it's a firefighter. And just like, I mean, I just, he was so my type but not my type, my type in my mind, but we did not hit it off in that way. But I was doing a firefighter romance and I was like, oh, wow, I should call him up. So, and this guy in the book is like so perfect and wonderful and loving and caring. And I like text this whole meaningful thing to this guy about missing him and all that. And a few days go by and I get, hey,
Oh
and it's
God.
like,
Wah, wah, wah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's listen, but I think again, this is really I think this is really important, right, to be able to share with people because everything you're describing, I've heard this, right, in private, in therapy sessions with people who are really wanting to find that ideal. And it's not just the ideal person. I think that more than anything, and you tell me if this resonates with you, but I think more than anything, people are looking for that feeling. And so sometimes the person doesn't matter as much as the feeling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like we're chasing that feeling of
totally.
wanting, right? Of wanting to be loved and wanting to be cherished and have someone to give that same thing to. And those feelings of happiness and the feelings of peace and grounding that relationships give us. So I'm just curious if for you there was some of that. If you think back at like what was I actually looking for? Because it wasn't the firefighter, right? But there
Yeah.
was something about that novel that you were reading that I think provoked some feelings, right? Or stirred up some feelings in you that then you're like, yeah, I want that. Right. So is it the person that we're looking for or is it the feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of chasing the feeling. I definitely have done that in that instance with the book and the guy for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
he had proven this guy had basically just let me know he wasn't even interested, you know. Was like
Yeah.
happy to stay in touch here and there but had no interest in me. But I was still going to chase that feeling cuz that was just what I was going to do, right? So I think that, and I do think that is a big problem, and I wish more people would kind of examine that and be like, am I chasing a
Mhm.
feeling or am I after this person? Because what happens is, I think on these apps especially, is that you can always get a bigger high. You know, there's always somebody who might look a little bit better, might be a little bit funnier, might make a little bit more, whatever your criteria might be. And if you are chasing that feeling, you're like, okay, this was great, but I'm going to go for this or I'm going to go for that. Like, I
Yeah.
literally have had guys like message me on the app. We've been having a great time talking. And it's like, now we're at the point of like, should we go out? And one guy was like, you seem so great. You seem so sweet. I wish you were taller though. So for that reason,
Oh my
I'm out.
gosh.
You know, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, why'd you waste my time? You know? And so, and I'm sure I've wasted people's time, but it's like, yeah, they want this like perfect sort of like everything
Yeah.
aligned. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's unfortunate.
And to be honest with you, again, in my experience, sometimes when we have such a long and exact checklist that doesn't allow for any margin of quote unquote error, sometimes people are actually using that as a way of avoiding commitment and avoiding relationships. So, for all of you out there that are looking for that exact bullet list and everybody has to meet the exact criteria, I would invite you to maybe examine that and think about, well, what if you did find someone with all of that? Is there a part of you that maybe would then start looking for something that is wrong?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
anyway,
Yeah.
I want to move towards your work because one of the things that I've really enjoyed learning about with you and the work that you do is how you integrate your faith and scripture and neuroscience. And those are two lenses that don't feel like they should be working together, and yet they work so well together. They've worked so well together for you. I've known many people in my circles who also blend faith and neuroscience in a way that really serves for clarity. And they serve as tools for clarity. They serve as tools for, like I said before, comfort and being a compass. So I'd love to hear from you what your experience has been in integrating these two very important parts of your life, and maybe give me a little bit of insight as to how you use them to give you grounding of your emotions, how you use either or both when you're feeling overwhelmed in your emotions. Love to get some insight as to how these have been working for you.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of this came about because, like I said, you know, during the divorce, I was really leaning on my faith. And then I happened
Mm-hmm.
to get introduced to this like brain science stuff. And I was like, all this like is making sense as to like, why do I do the things I do? Why am I stuck in a rumination loop and I can't get out? You know, and there are, and I know, understand like for some faith communities, this can be kind of controversial, but we're taught in the faith, it's like all you need is just to trust in God. Well, you know, God actually created, and this is, you know, my belief in this is that God created our brains a certain way, and it's probably good to know what way that is and how it works, because
Mm-hmm.
there's reason and rhyme behind it all. Like, it's not, you know, to me, the way that our brains work was designed. And I have actually then, as I've gone back through scripture, I find areas where it's like, this is what this actually means. You know, scriptures that might be a little bit like esoteric, or you're like, what are they talking about here? Even just like the principles of, like, you know, in psychology, I was talking about the radical acceptance, you know, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a new idea. That was actually in the Bible. Paul, the apostle Paul, talks about in all things, like whether I have a lot or a little, this is where I'm at. I
This is
accept.
what it is.
Yeah. And it's like, and through that, then he says, you know, I can do all things through Christ. And so it's like, yes, God gives me this tool, my brain and my body, to learn how to use it properly. And for me personally, I'm always like one of those people, it's like, I want to know why. So I was
Hmm.
probably, I have to ask my parents. I was probably one of those kids that ask why. But like, when I learned like why I get stuck in rumination loops, why when I would get so down about something and it's like nothing, people would be like, cheer up. And I don't think that works for anybody, but
Yeah, no.
it really didn't work for me. And so knowing like, okay, I'm not seeing what I want to see in my life. For example, I think a lot of times like the manifestation stuff out there that's kind of somewhat, people think of it as like somewhat spiritual and whatnot, but it's like, well, actually, I've kind of felt like, no, that can't be true. But then you learn about the RAS and it's like what you
Right.
focus on, you start to bring into your life more. And it's like, okay, there is science behind this. Like there is actually science that I can look to, which explains some of these like other things that we see going on.
And for those people who are not familiar with the RAS, reticular activating system, can you give a simple explanation of what our brain's RAS is?
Yeah. So, I mean, we see just thousands and thousands of things every day that our brain can't process every single bit of information that it's given. And so we have this system basically that searches out what we focus on. So, one of the classic examples that's given is like, if you think about you're going to buy a red car, all of a sudden you're like driving around, you're like, I never see red cars. And now everybody has a red car.
Yeah.
Those red cars were always there before. It's because you've been thinking about them. Now you're starting to like see them everywhere. And in the same way, we can use it for good or for bad in our lives. Like if I tell myself, I never get anything good in life. Well, I'm going to look, my brain is going to, it's very efficient and it's going to be like, got it. That's what you want. You want nothing good in your life. I will find
Mm-hmm.
nothing good in your life.
Yep.
Whereas if you say, okay, I'm going to focus on, we can't like, I can't say like, I'm going to have a relationship tomorrow. But if I'm like, I'm going to have healthy connections with people, that's what I'm
Yeah.
focusing on. Doesn't mean I will find the love of my life. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But what I am seeing are those people that are healthy connections for me in my life and then, see where that goes. And I can recognize that and see it. And then also recognize the ones that are not healthy and let that go in a non-dramatic way, which I failed to do in the beginning. So
I love the way that you've explained the intersection of faith and scripture and neuroscience in how you've made it work for you, how it makes sense to you. And you're right, sometimes when we are figuring ourselves out and we're figuring out what it is that we need and how the things that we need fit into our world, they're not always going to fit into other people's worlds and other people's perceptions. What about Melie now? When you think about the work that you do now, what you're studying, what you're teaching people through your coaching program, and you think about disappointment, what do you think about it now when you think about, I might disappoint this person or I might not be able to please them, right? Or make them happy because I'm going to say no to something.
yeah, well, first of all, saying no is very important, and boundaries I think is something that like so important to learn because there were so many years in my life where I had no boundaries, and I thought that made me a kind person because I
Hmm.
would say yes to everything, but inside I would be seething. It's like yes, I'll help you with that. Oh, I'd love to help you with that. So it's like I'm not doing anybody any favors if I'm just not allowing myself to disappoint somebody because I'm giving way too much. That's how you lead to like burnout. That's
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
relationships go just downhill. And so I've come to realize that I will. I mean, there's nothing I can do to not disappoint people, but what I can do is try to make authentic decisions and not disappoint myself by being inauthentic, because that is the worst feeling, to be
Yeah.
disappointed in yourself knowing you were inauthentic. And that's why, we all make mistakes and can feel that sense of disappointment. But if it's because you weren't true to yourself
Yeah.
and you went against yourself and you did something outside of what you knew was at the core of what you wanted or who you are, that is just like, that is something I never want to feel again. And so, for me, I will now, if I can't do something, I say no. And that was hard.
Yeah.
Like, no feels like such a dirty word sometimes, especially I think, if for those who did grow up in like a faith based, it's like you can never say no if it's like somebody's asking you to do something that might be considered like holy work or whatever. And it's like, no,
Hmm.
where each person has a certain measure of energy and time everything you say yes to, you are saying no to something else. So if you're
Yeah.
constantly saying no to yourself, where does that leave you?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good reminder. I'm so glad that you said that. And again, I want to repeat that for those of you listening. Every time I say yes to something, ask yourself, what am I saying no to with
Hmm.
regards to yourself? Melie, your coaching program, you offer courses like Resilient Rebuild,
Hmm.
and you have an app, Renewed Mind. You also offer one on one coaching. Can you tell us a little bit about these tools, your work, and how they help people to understand or practice the types of things that maybe they're not able to do alone or that maybe they need some guidance with?
Yeah, for sure. So, Resilient Rebuild is an on demand course. It has 8 modules. It's about 2 hours in length. There is a section on boundaries and the
Hmm.
importance of those. There's the difference between joy and happiness and how we have joy, even when our circumstances might not be the happiest. And the idea behind it, it's really for people going through either a breakup, divorce. But I have had a couple people go through it who were experiencing other, just family situations that weren't
Mm.
necessarily the breakup of a romantic situation, but were still applicable to them as far as like moving forward, understanding who you are, understanding that your identity and someone else's are not, they don't need to stay stuck together in that way. And so that course, yeah, I do offer that. And then my app, Renewed Mind, is kind of it's where I've really blended the neuroscience and the faith piece. So
Hmm.
it's available. It will be available in the Android store soon. I'm still working on the mobile build, but it's available in the Apple App Store and then as a web app too. And it basically helps you build resilience over time by tell it your circumstance, whatever's going on for you that day, how you're feeling, and then based on these exercises that I have put into the app, it will personalize one. It will choose based on what you've said, an exercise that fits your situation, and it will personalize it to whatever your situation is, give you that exercise, and then track it over time, like to show you, maybe you've been anxious, 7 days
Mm.
this month. It'll show you that. It'll give you kind of some feedback. I've also recently added monthly challenges in there that blend faith and science. So we did have one on the reticular activating system a couple months ago. This month is like on new beginnings and what that looks like. So different fun challenges in there, and I've got some cool things coming soon too that will help actually even further build resilience over time. So yeah, it's been fun. And then I have actually a knitting app too that also kind of has to do with resilience, but it gives people like mindfulness prompts and things to do while they're knitting to like help
Yeah.
kind of, be in that space. I just, yeah, in my free time, I make apps.
Well,
So
I
that's,
love it. I mean, these sound really, really interesting. And actually
thanks.
the knitting app, it's funny because I recently bought a little knitting sort of packet thingy for my daughter and I to learn together.
How fun.
And the reason I got it is because I, I just every time I see people knitting, they look like they're in a this very zen, relaxed, in the zone place. And I look at them and I'm like, gosh, that looks like that might be nice. It just looks like something that could really calm your brain. Is that what it's like? Because that's why I got the thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yes, it is. Honestly, it's like my favorite tool for when I need to like self-regulate or anything. I have an Instagram account. Knitting is my therapy is what it's called. And I post a lot about like what are like the benefits, the mental health benefits, the nervous system regulation benefits of knitting. They're actually documented. There are research studies out there that show that these kinds of like crafts where you're using your hands, the bilateral movement, so
Mm.
much with knitting that I recommend it to everyone. I was commenting on something in LinkedIn even today, completely unrelated to knitting, and somehow it came up. I'm like, I have to bring it up wherever
I
I go.
love that. I'm so curious. I did not know that you had that account. So thank you so much. I know that we have come to the end of our time together, but before we go, I have one final question for you. How would you define emotionally wealthy?
Let's see. I would say that that is, to me, like emotional wealth would be in no matter what circumstance that I find myself in, I can be calm, I can be regulated, I can handle what comes my way, bend and not break, kind of that resilience piece.
Mm.
And yeah, I would say that, it does take time to get there. And so coming out of my divorce, I was very much, maybe emotionally poor.
Mhm.
But, as you grow and learn and just invest in the tools needed to get to that place, I would say that emotional wealth to me is like just being able to know that no matter what, I am okay and I will absolutely, whatever comes next, I've got it.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Melie Williams, everyone. Thank you so much, Melie, for being here. This was amazing. I love talking to you.
Thank you, Karen. I love talking to you too. I really appreciate being on your show.
Oh man, I hope you come back soon. So just look out for that email. But in the meantime, thank you again. And everyone, I want you to head over to Diamonds in Dumpster Fires podcast. That's Melie's podcast. It's so good. And in the meantime, thank you all for listening to Emotionally Wealthy and for showing up for yourselves. If this episode gave you insight, clarity, or a perspective that you needed, or maybe there's somebody that you feel could benefit from it, go ahead and share it. And if you're enjoying the show, leave a review because that will help more people find these conversations. And until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay emotionally wealthy. Till next time.
Oh, hey, quick reminder for you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always consult a qualified professional with any questions you might have.